Welcome to this election special News at 1. In the past half an hour, Sir Keir Starmer has addressed the nation for the first time as Prime Minister.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace, where I accepted an invitation from His Majesty the King to form the next government of this great nation.
In a landslide victory, Labour will return to power with a huge parliamentary majority.
For the Conservatives, a night of pain with an historic number of seats lost. Rishi Sunak says he will now step down as leader of his party.
I have given this job my all, but you have sent a clear signal that the government of the United Kingdom must change, and yours is the only judgment that matters.
A great night. Democrats as well, they become the third largest party.
At the 8th time of asking, Nigel Farage is elected as an MP as Reform received more than 4 million votes.
The Greens celebrate as the party wins a record 4 seats in the House of Commons.
The SNP suffer their worst results since 2010. The leader, John Swinney, describes it as very, very difficult and damaging.
In Wales, the Conservatives are wiped out, with Labour and Plaid Cymru making gains.
And in Northern Ireland, the biggest party will be Sinn Féin, who now have 7 MPs, but significant losses for the Democratic Unionist Party.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1 live from Westminster on an historic day. Labour has won an historic victory in the general election, confining the Conservatives to their worst ever defeat.
With 2 out of the 650 results, just 2 left to come, the current state is that Labour has taken 412 seats to just 121 to the Conservatives. The Liberal Democrats will have 71 MPs in the next Parliament, with the SNP falling to 9. Reform, the Green and Plaid Cymru will have 4 MPs each, and Sinn Féin will be the biggest party from Northern Ireland. They will have 7.
Within the last half an hour, Sir Keir Starmer has arrived in Downing Street. He is now the country's new Prime Minister. Well, let's go straight to Downing Street. Our political editor, Chris Mason, is there, and a real moment of history, Chris.
Yeah, an extraordinary few hours and a privilege to witness what's happened here in Downing Street this morning. The departure of Rishi Sunak, the choreography of that trip to Buckingham Palace, shortly followed by the arrival of Sir Keir Starmer. And then in the last half hour or so, Sir Keir Starmer and his wife Victoria arriving here. Keir Starmer arriving here for the first time as Prime Minister. Plenty of Labour activists invited into the street here, waving Union flags and Welsh flags and the saltire too, an attempt to project an image of a government for the whole of the UK. And worth emphasising how rare moments like this are. I was just doing the sums in my head as we were listening and watching the montage a couple of minutes ago. It's only 4 times in the last 45 years that we've seen the transference of power from Labour to the Conservatives or Conservatives to Labour. 1979, 1997, 2010 and now 2024. Here is the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, speaking here in the last half hour.
You have given us a clear mandate, and we will use it to deliver change, to restore service and respect to politics, end the era of noisy performance, tread more lightly on your lives, and unite our country. 4 nations standing together again, facing down, as we have so often in our past, the challenges of an insecure world, committed to a calm and patient rebuilding.
A real striking emphasis there from the Prime Minister, as we'll learn to call him, about trying to reset the tone of how politics is conducted, contrasting what he hopes to bring to government, let's see, with what has gone before, particularly in the last couple of years, with the chaos and the turmoil that there's been of all of the turnover of Prime Ministers and indeed turnover of senior cabinet ministers too. So, what a morning after what a night. Time to catch up and take stock, I think. Here is our political correspondent, Helen Catt.
Labour supporters jumping for joy this morning, quite literally. In less than 5 years, Sir Keir Starmer has taken his party from serious defeat to a landslide victory.
A burden finally removed from the shoulders of this great nation. And now we can look forward again, walk into the morning, the sunlight of hope, pale at first, but getting stronger through the day, shining once again on a country with the opportunity, after 14 years, to get its future back.
After weeks of caution, the Labour leader finally let himself show his delight. And no wonder, seat after seat fell to Labour, with more than 400 going red. They did lose a handful of seats. The former leader Jeremy Corbyn beat his old party in Islington North. The Shadow Minister Jonathan Ashworth on the left here was among those who lost to independents who supported the Palestinian cause. But in the main, Labour steamrolled their way through at the expense of the Conservatives. They claimed the seats of big Tory names like the Commons leader Penny Mordaunt, the former Business Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Defence Secretary Grant Shapps, and even, just sidling into view here, a former Prime Minister, Liz Truss.
I hereby declare that Rishi Sunak is duly elected.
Her successor won his seat, but his face said it all. For the Tories, it hadn't rained, it had poured. 250 losses. Rishi Sunak, with his wife Akshata Murthy, walked out into Downing Street for the last time as Prime Minister this morning to apologise.
To the country, I would like to say first and foremost, I am sorry. I have given this job my all, but you have sent a clear signal that the government of the United Kingdom must change, and yours is the only judgment that matters. I have heard your anger, your disappointment, and I take responsibility for this loss. To all the Conservative candidates and campaigners who worked tirelessly but without success, I am sorry that we could not deliver what your efforts deserved.
A big cause of trouble for the Tories was Reform UK. It won 4 seats, but cost the Conservatives many more.
21,225.
Its leader, Nigel Farage, was elected as an MP on his 8th attempt in Clacton.
Believe me, folks, this is just the first step of something that is going to stun all of you.
The Liberal Democrat leader ended the night with the same exuberance with which he'd campaigned. A staggering comeback took them from 11 seats in 2019 to more than 70 this time, making them once again the third party in Westminster.
It's been fantastic. It's been a record-breaking night. This is a historic step forward for the Liberal Democrats. We will now be the largest third-party force in Parliament for over 100 years. And I think our positive campaign resonated with people, particularly putting health and care right at the centre.
The Greens hit a historic high too, quadrupling their seats from 1 in Brighton Pavilion to 4, including Bristol Central, won by their co-leader Carla Denyer. A result that seemed to be almost overwhelming.
Bristol, you made history today. Together we did it. We elected our city's first Green MP.
Also coming out of this election with more seats, again 4 of them, Plaid Cymru in Wales.
Plaid Cymru is the party that has that positive vision for Wales that you don't get from other parties.
A shock in Northern Ireland as Jim Allister of the traditional Unionists defeated Ian Paisley Jr. and Sinn Féin now have the most MPs here. In Scotland, the SNP were the big losers. They saw their seat tally slashed from more than 40 to just 9.
It goes without saying that last night was an incredibly tough night for the Scottish National Party, and I am very sorry to be losing so many able members of Parliament and candidates who were unsuccessful.
It's been an incredible night for the man who's changed the Labour Party and has promised the country he'll do the same. Helen Catt, BBC News, Westminster.
So that's the big picture. Let's get some detail, shall we? What does this result tell us about the enthusiasm for the new Labour government? What about the smaller parties? How did they fare?
Let's go to our colleague Christian Fraser, who is going to give us a breakdown of some of those results. Christian.
Sophie, thank you very much. 2 seats left to declare. This is what our final forecast looks like. Great night for the new Prime Minister. That is comparable to Tony Blair and the landslide in '97. This is a disaster without precedent. You can go back all the way to 1832. You won't find a result as bad as that. 1923, the last time the Liberal Democrats did as well as this. It's better than Clegg, Paddy Ashdown. The SNP swept away by the Keir Starmer change agenda. And how do you get just 4 seats for 4 million votes and yet 71 seats for 3.5 million? I will show you. And therein is a word of warning for the 2 parties that did well overnight. So Labour, you can see, just up 1% in terms of vote share. That is less than 2017 when Jeremy Corbyn was defeated by the Conservatives, and it's certainly worse than the landslide in 1997. And a similar tale of caution for the Liberal Democrats, flatlining at 13%. So how did they do so well? The simple answer is that they concentrated their vote in those seats where it counted. So where the Conservatives were up against Labour, Labour is up 6%. The Liberal Democrat vote is squeezed. There's your evidence of tactical voting. Conversely, in those seats where Liberal Democrats were best placed to defeat Conservatives, they're up 7, Labour are down 1. And there you see the Reform vote taking big chunks out of the Conservative vote. So it is more about revulsion for Conservative candidates than it is about revolution. Here are 2 really good examples of where you see that. So in Chichester, where the Liberal Democrats are always competitive, you see Liberal Democrats up 29%. Labour vote is squeezed. There's the Reform vote for absolutely no benefit. Gillian Keegan, the Education Secretary, booted out in Chichester. In Hitchin, similar story. So this is where Labour are competitive. They're up 17%. Liberal Democrats down 14%. Again, Reform have quite a big vote. Bima Falami losing, though, because, of course, there's a big chunk there coming out of the Conservative vote. But again, for Reform, no benefit. So where did Reform do well? Simple answer, in those seats where there was a really chunky Leave vote back at the referendum. So Clacton for Nigel Farage, they've got in Ashfield, they've got Lee Anderson, in Boston and Skegness, Richard Tice, the deputy leader, and here in Great Yarmouth, Rupert Lowe, former chair of Southampton Football Club, pushing the Conservatives into 3rd place. And that is almost, isn't it, a straight swap from Reform, from the Conservatives to Reform on a swing of 38%. One other thought just to leave you with, there is the 1% increase in Labour's vote share across the country. But look at this. In those communities where there is a sizable Muslim minority, Labour down 19%, Independents up 19%. Where Independents were campaigning on Gaza and the Middle East, they did very well, and that is why Labour lost 4 seats to Independents up and down the country.
Christian Fraser, thank you. Well, Rishi Sunak retained his seat in North Yorkshire, but conceded victory to Labour soon afterwards. He said the public had delivered a sobering verdict, and he took responsibility for what has turned into the Conservative Party's worst ever defeat.
Yeah, in the last couple of hours, he's announced he will be standing down as party leader once arrangements for choosing a successor are in place. Here's our political correspondent, Jessica Parker.
Shapps Grant, the Conservative Party candidate, 16,078.
One by one, Tory big beasts fell.
It's not so much that Labour won,
this election, but rather that the Conservatives have lost it.
Cabinet ministers, likely leadership hopefuls, former Brexit poster boys.
And congratulate Sir Keir Starmer, who has led his party to what seems to be an historic victory.
And even an ex-Prime Minister.
Have you destroyed the Conservative Party?
Rishi Sunak, seen heading into Conservative campaign headquarters earlier, kept his seat, but he's lost 250 colleagues.
The rain is coming down outside Conservative campaign headquarters this morning. It is reminiscent of the day that Rishi Sunak announced this general election in Downing Street. The result has been a disaster for him, and now a new battle begins for the heart of the Conservative Party.
The bin men also came to visit, but who'll now clear up this political mess? No one's declared, but contenders for the leadership might include characters like Kemi Badenoch, Suella Braverman or Priti Patel.
Thank you.
Perhaps James Cleverly, Tom Tugendhat.
Good to see you.
Or Jeremy Hunt, seen departing number 11 Downing Street with his family. No longer to be the Chancellor, he only just clung on as an MP.
One of the tensions, though, will be, compared to 1997, when the Conservative Party last lost, is the parliamentary party is perhaps more centrist, whereas the 1997 party was more right-wing. And there's going to potentially be a tension between the parliamentary party with that bias and the party in the country, the grassroots, which are much more right-wing, much more like reform.
None of us can sit back.
Turbulence has followed successive Tory Prime Ministers, and a wider post-mortem is now well underway.
Where do you think it went wrong?
Well, we lost the trust of the British people by not delivering. That's where it went wrong.
I'm fed up of personal agendas and jockeying for position. You know, the truth is now, with the Conservatives facing this electoral Armageddon, it's going to be like a group of bald men arguing over a comb.
The convoy carrying Rishi Sunak was booed outside Downing Street after 14 years of Conservative rule, an inglorious exit. In politics, at the end, it often is. Jessica Parker, BBC News in Westminster.
Well, perhaps one of the most dramatic moments of the night was when the former Prime Minister Liz Truss lost her Norfolk South West seat by just 630 votes.
Ros Atkins was at the count in King's Lynn and he managed to catch up with her shortly after that result was announced.
Outside Liz Truss's constituency office, a clean-up was underway this morning. For those inside, there's a political mess that will take longer to fix. South West Norfolk has elected a Tory MP for decades. Not anymore.
Well, she hasn't done any good that I can think of.
She'd failed as a Prime Minister. She just seems a little bit of a failure now.
She's arrogant. She's just arrogant.
At the count in King's Lynn, rumours swirled that this time was different. It was.
We have received a strong indication that Liz Truss has lost. For the last few hours, the Labour Party has been telling us they believe they're in a strong position.
Minutes later, the candidates gathered on stage. Last to arrive was Liz Truss, to face defeat. There would be no concession speech, but there was a brief explanation of how this happened.
I think the issue we've faced as Conservatives is we haven't delivered sufficiently on the policies people want.
But do you accept that first as a cabinet minister and then for a brief time as Prime Minister, you were part of the people in power who were overseeing those things not being delivered?
I agree I was part of that. That's absolutely true.
Was there a message to Tory voters who'd lost faith? Liz Truss declined to say. It was time for goodbye to her colleagues and, for now, her political career.
Just one last opportunity to ask for a message to the Conservative voters, because I think they would like to hear from you.
From Prime Minister to losing her seat in 2 years. A damning judgment on a politician and a party delivered by voters who reached their breaking point. Ros Atkins, BBC News.
Well, much has been made of the so-called Red Wall, those largely Brexit-supporting areas in northern England and the Midlands, where Boris Johnson's Conservatives did so well in 2019. Now, many have reverted back to Labour.
So our North of England correspondent Danny Savage has been to the constituency of Bishop Auckland, which has just returned a Labour MP.
Bishop Auckland, part of the so-called Red Wall in the past. It went Conservative in 2019, but has now resoundingly swung back to Labour. 18-year-old Charlotte was a first-time voter and backed Labour.
Like, the local economy is not very well stimulated, and there's no high street and stuff, so it's there's nothing to do here and there's no opportunities here, you know. And
will you be judging Labour on that in 5 years' time?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Chris voted Tory last time and Labour yesterday.
If they were to fulfil all the promises that they've just, in the last 6 weeks, dished out, that would be fantastic. But of course, I live in the real world, and I don't think it's going to be like that. In fact, I think that Keir Starmer will find he's got all the same problems as Rishi Sunak.
There are plenty of residual Tory voters here. You both voted Conservative. Are you disappointed, or did you think this was going to happen?
I knew it was going to happen. I just didn't want... We were trying to keep the opposition up, basically, yeah.
People blame the Tories for a lot of things that were beyond their control.
Reform came third here. Malcolm supported them. He's happy that Nigel Farage has finally been elected.
He's got 4 seats. They don't know what they'll do, but at least he can have a go, you know.
He's now got an official position, as
yes.
you like, yes.
Yeah, and it's a start. So in 5 years' time, who knows?
This time yesterday, you could have gone coast to coast across the far north of England without leaving Conservative territory. Now it's all Labour, and that includes constituencies like Hexham, which was held by the Tories for nearly 100 years. But in this Labour gain, their supporters want to see results.
I've got quite a young family. I've got 2 little ones. Just see what they do for us in that sort of respect, and hopefully a bit more prosperity for the future for them more than myself.
Labour campaigned on change and voters responded. People here really hope there are better times ahead. Danny Savage, BBC News, Bishop Auckland.
Well, the Liberal Democrat leader, Sir Ed Davey, has hailed a record-breaking night for his party after they won 71 seats. That represents a huge increase on its performance in the 2019 election, when it returned to Parliament with just 11 MPs.
We can speak now to our political correspondent, Hannah Miller, who joins us from Maidenhead, which, of course, Hannah, used to be Theresa May's constituency.
Absolutely, yes, John. This is one of the Conservative heartland seats that the Liberal Democrats took last night for the first time since it was created. Former seat, as you say, of Theresa May. They also won in Witney, which used to be represented by one David Cameron, and also in Henley, which used to be the seat of Boris Johnson. The Liberal Democrats now have more seats than even during the coalition years. And this morning, Ed Davey said he wouldn't take voters for granted.
And, you know, trust is a very precious commodity. It's hard won. And sometimes you've lost it, you lose it. And you have to work very hard to win it back. And I want to thank people for trusting us again. We will not let you down. We will honour your trust.
The story of what's going on here really is twofold. The dramatic loss in Conservative support, but also the deliberate targeting by the Liberal Democrats of seats where they previously came second. We all saw the stunts, didn't we? Ed Davey paddleboarding, Ed Davey driving a JCB, bungee jumping. But behind the scenes, there was a lot more serious strategy going on. They know as a party what it is like to pick up a lot of votes and not many seats. And this time, they were much more targeted in what they were trying to do. They played the game that was in front of them, and they have been rewarded with some really historic wins.
Hannah Miller, thank you very much indeed. Well, on the 8th attempt, Nigel Farage succeeded in being elected to Parliament. The Reform UK leader will be joined by 3 colleagues as well after the party received 15% of the national vote share.
Well, let's talk to our special correspondent, Lucy Manning, who has been following their campaign. Lucy, they did very well in terms of the number of votes. They actually got more votes than the Liberal Democrats, although it didn't translate into seats.
Yes, that's right. The third largest vote share and the third largest number of votes, but not the third largest number of seats. But Nigel Farage and the Reform UK party will be and are very happy with their 4 MPs. Mr. Farage is about to arrive probably in the next hour or so here in central London with his 3 MPs near the House of Commons. The message that they want to send out very clear, that Reform UK has landed at Westminster. And just think back a few weeks ago, Nigel Farage was prepared to sit this one out, but he realised that to win it, he had to be in it. And that seemed to galvanise the Reform UK campaign. They squeezed the Tory vote, helping to bring about the downfall of the Tory government. And they took seats not just in Clacton, Mr. Farage's seat, but Ashfield, Boston and Skegness and Great Yarmouth. But at the declaration last night when he won his seat, Mr. Farage was very clear he now has Labour in his sights.
Enthusiasm for Starmer whatsoever. In fact, about half of the vote is simply an anti-Conservative vote. This Labour government will be in trouble very, very quickly. We will now be targeting Labour votes. We're coming for Labour, be in no doubt about that.
And the bruised Tory party will now have to decide how to deal with reform. Mr. Farage sees this as a launchpad for 2029, but Westminster will be waiting for the populist, the disruptor, as Nigel Farage is finally an MP.
Lucy Manning, thank you. Well, it was a terrible night for the Scottish National Party. The leader of the SNP, John Swinney, has committed to staying on in his role despite his party suffering heavy losses overnight. They dropped from the 48 seats that they won in 2019 to just 9.
And as Katie Hunter now reports, this marks the SNP's worst performance in a general election for more than a decade.
Look at this.
This is what victory looks like. Labour won just a single Scottish seat at the last general election.
These new Scottish Labour MPs.
This time they won, and big.
Look, the country is crying out for change. After 14 years of Tory chaos, we finally turned the page. But also, let's be really clear, this is also a recognition of the incompetence failure of an SNP government too. And I want to thank the people of Scotland for putting their faith and trust in the Labour Party. I understand their desire for change, and now the hard work starts to deliver it.
The biggest story in Scotland was the scale of the SNP defeat.
Douglas Alexander is duly elected.
The party lost seat after seat after seat to Labour. Independence was page 1, line 1 of the SNP's manifesto. The party's new leader and First Minister John Swinney was in reflective mood this morning.
I have to accept that we failed to convince people of the urgency of independence in this election campaign. And therefore, we need to take the time to consider and to reflect on how we deliver our commitment to independence, which remains absolute.
The outgoing Scottish Tory leader lost to the SNP in Aberdeenshire North and Moray East, but the party held on to 5 of their 6 Scottish seats.
It's deeply disappointing, but I knew this was a possibility. In fact, when I announced that I was standing, I said the SNP would throw everything at the seat. I said John Swinney would make a rare appearance up to the north east of Scotland. He made more than 1 rare appearances. It'll now be interesting to see what the SNP do for this area.
The Lib Dems won 5 Scottish seats, with the possibility of 1 more in the Highlands to come. But in Scotland, this election was largely won and lost in the Central Belt. Here in Glasgow, Labour won all 6 of the city's seats from the SNP.
Happy, very happy, yes.
I think we need to do something, try and get this country back on its feet again.
And the SNP will want to get back on its feet too. This election hurt for a party so used to winning. Katie Hunter, BBC News, Glasgow.
The Conservatives have been wiped from the electoral map in Wales, where every Tory candidate lost, with Labour taking seat after seat.
But there were also successes for Plaid Cymru and the Lib Dems. Thomas Morgan reports.
Bore da. And to borrow a phrase, it really is a good morning in Wales. The morning after...
First Minister Vaughan Gething leading the celebrations for Labour. Deciding to hold their victory party in what has been a Tory heartland illustrates a ripping up of the political infrastructure here, as the majority of the Welsh public turn their backs on the Conservatives.
How long have you been voting Conservative for until yesterday?
Since I was 18.
Since you were 18?
Since I was 18, and I'm 79, and I voted Labour yesterday.
For the first time?
Yes.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Voted Conservative historically and yesterday.
Yeah. And why was that?
Always have done, probably always will do.
Nothing was going to sway you?
I considered reform.
I changed to Labour for this vote.
A big change then?
Yep. Well, the Tories have gone so far right wing. But, you know, new modern Labour is probably more central.
The night began with a string of former Tory cabinet members losing out. And last to declare was Monmouthshire, where David T.C. Davis became the first Welsh secretary to lose his seat whilst in office since the post was created.
So the end of the road for the Tories here in Wales for now, a total wipeout. Where and how do they build back from here? And for Labour, even though they constructed a successful campaign here, winning the majority of seats, their share of the vote is down, their lowest since 1935. A potential concern maybe going into the Senedd elections in 2 years' time.
You're wondering if Welsh Labour are looking at the figures below the headlines and are hearing some alarm bells and are wondering why more of their support didn't turn out or in fact went elsewhere. They've only got 18 months before they go to the polls again in Wales, and you suspect that they ought to be asking those questions of themselves.
And there were emotional scenes on Ynys Môn as Plaid Cymru won both their targets, benefiting from other parties' drop in support. Thomas Morgan, BBC News, Monmouth.
Well, more history has been made overnight. For the first time, Sinn Féin has become Northern Ireland's largest party in Westminster, but its members don't take their seats in the House of Commons.
The Democratic Unionist Party lost 3 of its seats, including the one held by Ian Paisley, and he or his father had held that for more than 50 years. Let's get the latest from our Ireland correspondent, Chris Page, who's in Belfast. Chris, significant day.
Yes, John, in Northern Ireland it was a night of shocks, splits and shifts. And for the Democratic Unionist Party, the results were hugely disappointing, verging on disastrous. The most unexpected did come in North Antrim, where the DUP's safest seat was taken by its most vociferous critic, Ian Paisley, being unseated by Jim Allister, the leader of the traditional Unionist Voice, a party which based its campaign on opposition to the DUP's power-sharing partnerships in the devolved government. The DUP also lost ground to more moderate political forces, to the Ulster Unionist Party losing 1 seat and another seat to the Cross Community Alliance Party. So in all, the DUP dropping from 8 seats to 5 seats. Sinn Féin held on to its 7 seats, meaning that after victories in council elections and in the election to the devolved assembly in the last 2 years, it now has more MPs than any other party in Northern Ireland, a historic hat-trick for the Irish Nationalist Party. And the Vice President of Sinn Féin, Michelle O'Neill, the First Minister of Northern Ireland, pointed towards the party's ultimate ambition of taking Northern Ireland out of the UK.
So I think the fact that we are now the largest party of local government, the largest party of the Assembly and the largest party of Westminster speaks to the fact that I think that it's time for change. It's time for us to be able to take control of our own fortunes here at home. So I look forward to the journey that we have ahead in terms of having a constitutional change conversation. What could that look like? What could be the better for us all here at home?
Well, those 7 Sinn Féin MPs won't be in the House of Commons. As Irish Republicans, they don't believe the UK Parliament has any authority over Northern Ireland. The DUP is largely blaming its bad performance on divisions within wider unionism.
Chris Page, thank you. Well, the Green Party of England and Wales is celebrating its best ever results. They are up from 1 MP in the last Parliament to 4.
And one of them is the party's co-leader, Carla Denyer, who took the newly created seat of Bristol Central. And our West of England correspondent, Dan Johnson, is there for us now. 1 of 4, Dan.
Yes, I think this performance is beyond what the Green Party was hoping for. They are really pleased with their performance. Across the south of England, they've defended the seat that they already held in Brighton Pavilion. They have won the seat of Bristol Central. That means that they've unseated Thangam Debonair, who was Labour's Shadow Culture Secretary. That's something for Keir Starmer to contemplate now, who will replace her. They also picked up the seat of Waveney Valley in East Anglia and North Herefordshire too, with big gains. So the co-leader, Carla Denyer, who is now the MP for Bristol Central, has been celebrating with her supporters this morning and telling them that the Green Party at this election has made history.
Everyone who voted Green, wherever you are, you've helped strengthen the case and make it easier for us, the Green MPs who've been elected, to push the incoming Labour government to be bolder on environmental matters and on making this country a fairer place.
Their share of the vote is nudging up towards 7%. That would be their best performance ever. And these are different seats that they've picked up. The seat here in Bristol, very urban, like the Brighton seat that they were defending. But the seat in East Anglia and in Herefordshire, very rural places where the Conservatives had traditionally been safe in their seats. So the Green Party is saying this shows they have a broad base of support from which they can now build.
Dan, thank you very much indeed.
Well, Sir Keir Starmer walked into Downing Street less than an hour ago, and his work begins right now.
But what do we know about him? Well, our political correspondent Nick Eardley now looks back at the new Prime Minister's own personal journey and his rise to power.
Keir Starmer has made it to the very top of British politics, but his journey to Downing Street wasn't always an obvious one. Keir Rodney Starmer was born in 1962, named after the first leader of the Labour Party, Keir Hardie. He was raised on the Surrey-Kent border, and he's spoken of what he called the hard times of growing up in the 1970s.
If you're working class, you're scared of debt. You're scared. My mum and dad were scared of debt. So they would choose the bill that they wouldn't pay.
The young Keir Starmer was a keen musician at school, a member of the Young Socialists, and a passionate footballer, a central midfielder on the left. But he chose to study law at university and soon entered the legal profession. With a growing reputation as a workaholic, Starmer's legal stock grew. In 2008, he was made Chief Prosecutor for England and Wales. He oversaw significant cuts during the coalition government's austerity programme, but also high-profile prosecutions against MPs over expenses and the Lib Dem minister, Chris Huhne, for asking his wife to take speeding points. In 2015 came a career change at the age of 52. The now Sir Keir won a Labour safe seat in North London. He became Jeremy Corbyn's shadow Brexit secretary, backing a second referendum and backing his leader to be Prime Minister, even when others were reluctant to do so because of the handling of anti-Semitism allegations. The 2019 general election, of course, brought catastrophe for Labour. Corbyn resigned and Sir Keir won the race to succeed him. There were significant bumps in his early leadership. Starmer considered quitting after just 2 years when Boris Johnson's Conservatives beat Labour in the Hartlepool by-election. But he didn't quit. Instead, he took on Labour's left, often ruthlessly. Policies were junked, Corbyn was suspended, British patriotism was embraced.
Lots of words, lots of bluster, no answers.
There was, though, a bigger battle with the Conservative government. Boris Johnson mocked Starmer as indecisive and a bit dull.
Captain Crasheroony's snooze fest.
But after the party scandal forced Johnson from office, Sir Keir was soon facing Liz Truss and then Rishi Sunak. When the general election campaign came, Labour's slogan was a simple one: change. Sir Keir's approach was cautious, but we did learn more about his political instincts.
Yes, I would describe myself as a socialist.
He is only the 7th Labour Prime Minister in British history. Some still have questions about the new Prime Minister. The coming weeks and months may answer some of them. But what's undeniable is that he's done something many thought impossible just a few years ago. He's taken Labour from opposition back into power. Nick Eardley, BBC News.
So the new Prime Minister has gone inside number 10. Right now, he is beginning to appoint members of his new cabinet, and we will bring you all the details of that later this afternoon.
In a moment, we are going to go to the news where you are, but we're going to leave you right now with a reminder of some of the key moments as the results came in overnight.
From now on, you have a government unburdened by doctrine, guided only by the determination to serve your interest. We did it!
The British people have delivered a sobering verdict tonight.